Distinguished participants, on behalf of the capacity building team here at the Climate Change Secretariat, I would like to welcome you all to the second UNFCCC capacity building talk. Thanks to all the participants for your interest in attending this event. Special thanks to those who joined at difficult hours or experienced connectivity challenges. We look forward to interesting and insightful discussions over the next 90 minutes. Before we start, just a brief housekeeping rule. To avoid disruption and background noises, kindly please ensure that your microphone is muted and that your camera is switched off unless you're given the floor by a moderator to make an intervention. Please note that by participating in this event, you're providing your consent to it being recorded. Today's event is the second in the UNFCCC Capacity Building Talk series, which seeks to facilitate discussion and the sharing of knowledge and information among actors and stakeholders involved in climate capacity building, including to strengthen the focus of and the work of capacity building within the UNFCCC process. This series was launched last year during the virtual climate dialogues in November, where we had a very interesting first talk on the topic of monitoring and evaluation of capacity building efforts. For our second talk today, we have chosen the topic Attuning Capacity Building Efforts to Developing Countries' Needs and Priorities. Both the Capacity Building Framework for Developing Countries under the Convention as well as the Paris Agreement underline that capacity building should be country-driven, based on countries' needs and priorities, and foster country ownership. Efforts to enable country-driven capacity building and foster country ownership can be related to addressing technical and organizational bottlenecks as well as systemic transformations. We believe that the identification and discussion of challenges and actionable solutions is timely and relevant to global efforts to build capacities to address climate change and support the implementation of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. This second capacity building talk aims to shed light on country-driven capacity building and ownership and provide insights and solutions for providers and recipients of capacity building in order to foster country ownership and therefore facilitate more effective and sustainable capacity building. We hope that this capacity building talk will directly contribute to the ongoing work on capacity building in the UNFCCC process by facilitating a discussion on a topic which we believe is of key importance to parties and observers. Now, having said that, I will hand over to my colleague, Simone, who will quickly run us through the agenda of today's meeting and lead us on to the next part. Simone, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. And hello, everyone. It's great to see so many of you here already. Our team strives to sort of design these capacity building talks as interactive and participatory events with lots of room and space for you all to engage. And sort of besides providing space for general reflections and perspectives on country-driven capacity building and ownership today, we will also be focusing in our talk today on the organizational, logistical, and technical bottlenecks with regard to enhanced ownership of capacity building, including looking at the national, subnational, and local levels as well. Then we will also be looking at systemic challenges to fostering country ownership, including discussions on the role of providers and recipients of capacity building. And last but not least, we will also be looking at solutions or good practices to an effective deployment of country-driven capacity building actions that are attuned to developing countries' needs and priorities. And yeah, we will be starting today with a short icebreaker on Mentimeter, and then we will be moving into the panel discussion. So these will be our next 40 minutes or so. And then following our panel discussion, we will be having a 5-minute break, which will be followed by a 30-minute moderated open plenary discussion, where you will all be invited to ask questions to our panel, but also to share your own views and perspectives on the topic of the event. And then towards the end of our talk, we will ask you to share your key takeaways, again, via Mentimeter. And my colleague Alejandro, who just opened the event, will then also close our capacity building talk today. And I would now like to hand the floor to my colleague Max, who will start with our icebreaker on Mentimeter. So Max, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Simone, and welcome everyone to this second capacity building talk. Also on my behalf, very glad to see everyone. So to kick off this meeting, I invite you all to join us on Menti. You can do so by following the above link or entering the following code on menti.com. So I will also just read out the code for your information. So that is 7174 3569 on menti.com. And once you enter the Menti environment, you will see a map where you can quickly pinpoint from where you are joining us today, so that we get a sense of who we have here on the call with us. So please take a moment to log into Menti. I will quickly, let's see, we get the initial responses. Let's see, I see you have a pretty wide, people from all the way from the West Coast, from the US or Canada to Japan. So also a special thank you for those who are joining us from difficult time zones. I see we have a very large distribution, so that's very encouraging to see. We still get, let's see, I think still get more responses. So for those who are joining, you can join the Menti by going to menti.com and enter the code 71743569 and share with us where you are on the map. So I see we have covering a large part of the globe. So thank you very much for joining, for entering from where you are joining us today. In the interest of time, I will go to the next question, in which you will be asked to share from what kind of organizational background you are joining us. Let's see. It might take a moment. Oh, wait. All right, so we are now at the next slide. So please give us a hint on what kind of organization you're from. All right. So we have quite a lot of people from international organizations, a lot of people from governments, academia, non-NGOs, someone from youth, private sector, and also if your organization is not captured by any of these, then please identify other. So I think we have a pretty interesting and diverse group of people here. And then turning now to the final question of this introduction, to also kick off the discussion a little bit. So please, in a few words, or a few sentences, describe what ownership means to you in the context of capacity building. So you can type 1 or 2 sentences or some thoughts that you would like to share to kickstart the discussion. So I'll give you a minute or two to reflect on this. So retaining capacities in national institutions. First response, transparency. Country-driven and sustainable is being mentioned by someone. To lead your own process. Involved in the design of the capacity building since early on. Local development and empowerment lifted through structural support. Being able to become independent on a topic. Not needing any capacity building in the future. That's also an interesting definition. Target support to nationally determined capacity building needs. Participation is being mentioned. A high level of engagement, strong interest in applying best practices, build capacity, amplify across organizations. Needs driven, to improve my competency, aligned with broader country needs and plans, that the country or government is fully part of the process and continues and maintains it independently. Skills development. So as you can see, we have already captured a broad range of ideas that I think the panelists will draw on and maybe be inspired by to further their discussion. But I think by now it's time to move on to the next part and let the panelists also further on this discussion. And if you haven't got to input your comment, you can still do so, of course. But we will now go back to the main session. So thank you all very much for joining this Menti, and we'll get started on the next segment.
Thanks a lot, Max, and thanks to all the participants for your Menti responses. It was really great to learn a bit more from where are you joining it, from what type of institutions you are joining us today, but also getting a sense what country-driven capacity building and ownership means to all of you. I think it's now time to move into the panel discussion, time to start. We're delighted to have three distinguished panelists, experts with us today. First, I would like to introduce Shehnaz Musa, who will be our panel moderator. Shehnaz is the director of the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, short CDKN, and she is also a director at South North, where since 2016 she has overseen the Southern Africa Climate Finance Partnership program. And before that, Shehnaz was also African Regional Coordinator for CDKN and the Climate Resilience Lead for the Climate Resilient Infrastructure Development Facility, which delivers small-scale water infrastructure in Southern Africa. And besides that, she also previously consulted on a range of public sector projects, including managing the National Strategy for Sustainable Development in South Africa. And then turning to our panelists, I would like to introduce Rocio Condor-Golek. Rocio is a forestry officer at the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. She has 20 years of experience working at the national and international level in the agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector, with a focus on measurement, reporting, and verification under the UNFCCC and the Enhanced Transparency Framework under the Paris Agreement. And before joining FAO in 2012, she worked also for the governments of Peru and Italy. And at FAO, she is currently coordinating a global project called Building Global Capacity to Increase the Transparency in the Forest Sector, which is financed by the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency Trust Fund of the Global Environment Facility. And then turning to our second distinguished panelist, Orlando Ray Santos. Orlando is a climate advisor in the Ministry of Science, Technology and Environment of the Republic of Cuba since 2014. Prior to that, from 1999 to 2013, he led the Environmental Directorate in this ministry. And he has been attending the UN climate negotiations already since 2007, since COP13, and is an expert on the UN review process. And currently, Orlando supports the design and implementation of the National Agenda for Adaptation and Mitigation, and he also serves as a member of the Kyoto Protocol Compliance Committee. And yes, with this, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Shehnaz, Rocio, and Orlando. And just two more sentences before we start the discussion. Let me just provide you some quick guidance on how you as participants in today's meeting can engage with our panelists. We would ask you to please reserve your questions to our panelists for the open plenary discussion that follows our panel discussion. During that subsequent discussion that will be open plenary, you will be able to either directly post your questions in the chat or to write in the chat to request to make an intervention from the floor. And with this, it is my pleasure to hand over to Shanaz to start the discussion. Shanaz, we do have until around 40 minutes for this, so until around 2:55. And okay. Yes, I wish us all a great discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Simone. I'm just setting my stopwatch here so I don't get carried away. So firstly, before we go into our conversation, I'd like to thank Rosia and Orlando for making the time to be part of the session. And then also just to thank all of you that are attending. I mean, because we all extremely busy at the moment and there's so many competing priorities, and that you've chosen to be part of this one. So thank you. How I'd like to spend the next 40 minutes is actually have a conversation with Rocio and Orlando. And it's particularly around capacity building. And I'd like them, and I'm inviting them to talk from their experiences in delivering capacity building initiatives, particularly in the South. So I'll start off by asking them some framing or background questions, and then I'd like to move into more of the challenges and barriers, because this is something we're all often up against. And then based on that, to look at solutions and then ways forward. So Rocio and Orlando, would you like to say hello? And who, yes, do you want to switch your videos on and say, and just say hello so we can all see, yeah, see and hear you? So somebody, is that you? Okay, hi Orlando, I can see you. Good, good. Rocio, I can't find you here. So
good morning, good afternoon.
Okay, brilliant, I can hear you. Thank you. Thank you both. So I think—
Thank you, good day.
Yes, thank you. So I think as way of background, I'm going to ask you both this question and then to respond to it, and I'll look to Rocio to respond first. So in terms of capacity building practices, and I'm talking now of our experience in delivering CDKN. We've done quite a bit of capacity building on CDKN, but also on the Southern Africa Climate Finance Partnership. And what we've noticed is that in the last decade, there's been quite a bit of change in how it's delivered, but also in terms of what the implications for ownership are at the national, subnational, and local level. So I think my question to you is, how has the practice of capacity building changed over the last decade? And especially with implications for ownership at the different levels of national, subnational, and local level. Rocio, I'm going to look to you to respond first, and then to Orlando.
Thank you very much, Shanaz, and thank you also very much to the organizers for inviting me. I'm really, really happy to be part of this session and from this panelist. So let me respond to your question. The general trend in the international development community, is to replace the term capacity building with capacity development. The shift in terminology reflects an evolution from an original concept of an essentially externally driven process in which there were no pre-existing capacities, to a new concept that places a strong emphasis on national ownership and on indigenous change processes. Therefore, the FAO has also adopted the new term capacity development, defined it now as a process whereby individuals, organizations, and society as a whole unleash strength, create, adapt, and maintain capacity over time. To make its interventions more systematic and sustainable, FAO adopted a conceptual framework consisting of two capacities, technical and functional. But what is functional capacities? It's about enhancing countries' capacities to formulate and implement policies, to create, access, and exchange information, to initiate and sustain a network, and the capacity to manage. Consequently, functional capacities are a necessary complement to what technical capacities are. And it empowers national actors to effectively apply new knowledge and upscale the results of the intervention. So the traditional approach focus is on the technical dimension of problems, which are addressed through technical solutions. However, the enhanced approach focus is on both technical and functional dimensions of problems. The modalities of engagement and the process are as important as the technical aspects of the solution. But what difference does it make? Functional capacities facilitate the uptake and a scaling up of new technical knowledge. So an enhanced capacity development practice requires a shift from problem solving or direct role to a facilitative or indirect role. And let me provide two simple examples. In a traditional approach, some services that have been provided by FAO are technical assistance, training, problem analysis, concept proposals, while an enhanced approach provides service like coaching, mentoring, facilitating consensus building, knowledge and experience sharing, piloting, and networking creation. And this is just to explain a bit more how all this process has evolved, at least in the last decade, also for FAO. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's a few things I'd like to pick up on, but first I'd like Orlando to respond, and then then I'll pick it up after that. Orlando.
Thank you, and good day, because morning, afternoon, evening. First, thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Simon, Alejandro, all the organizers of the panel. For the panelists, that is a very useful exercise, because when you have to present that kind of process, then you have to organize your ideas and to deepen in some reasoning on these issues. So in some way, this panel is also a capacity building exercise, not only for the participants, but even for the panelists, with kind of enrich the views by hearing to many different views. On the considerations about the evolution of the capacity building in the last decade, my impression from the national point of view is that there is a strengthening of the framework, of the institutional framework, a better understanding of the needs and demands of the countries, in particular, departing from the Paris Agreement and the Capacity Building Committee. So I have an impression of a positive evolution of the general policy and institutional framework for capacity building, and the way in which the climate change process is organizing the responses to the capacity building needs. At the same time, we have to recognize that there is an increase in the needs for cooperation and the needs for capacity building, because of the increasing impact of the climate change. So when you look at Cuba and you consider the impact of climate change in the last year and the impact that we will face in the next years, that is clear that we need more cooperation, that we need more capacity building, and in particular for adaptation that is coming mainly from endogenous needs, because we need urgently these capacities in order to face the climate change challenge. And in the case of mitigation, we also have important needs on cooperation and capacity building needs, but in some way it's more because of the international process. Let's say we have now the natural determined contribution, the biennial transparency report, the low carbon emission strategy, the net zero carbon, and so on. So there are so many categories, and then that creates demands to the country to respond to that. So we have this difference when we consider adaptation versus mitigation. In the case of adaptation, the needs are more coming from the endogenous need, and in the case of mitigation, it's more because you are in the context of an international process. And I also have the impression when I look at the international framework that maybe it's easier to find that kind of support for capacity building when you look at the area of mitigation. Let's say when you look at the issue of transparency, if you try to enhance your framework on transparency, there are many feasible ways of doing that, but sometimes in adaptation it's not the same. We have an example of that. We have been dealing with the issue of climate rationale on the project for the Green Climate Fund, which is a very demanding category, that the climate rationale, and it's not clear how you can get the support, how you can get the capacity to deal with that demanding requirement from the international organizations like the Green Climate Fund. So that's the point. We feel that we are in a positive process, but at the same time, we have an increasing demand, and we have to see how we respond to those increasing demand.
Thank you, Orlando. Thanks, because that now, it leads me on to my next, my next part of the questions, and it's both for you, Rocio, and you, Orlando. So, Rocio, you spoke very much to a local level in capacity development interventions, and Orlando, you spoke more to the global. But what I was really, and maybe if you can just tell me a bit more, Rocio. So you called it capacity development instead of capacity building because it needs to be embedded in a system. Whereas I think with capacity building, you are building the capacity of individuals and then leaving. Now, what I also understood both of you saying is that ownership is really important for the capacity to be embedded. Now, Rocio and Orlando, what sorts of modalities do you use to ensure the ownership? So, for example, what we do, particularly on CDKN, is that all our capacity building interventions have to be demand driven. So we only respond to demand. So if I had to summarize what our modality is, then it's demand driven. Now, Rocio, in the same case, what is FAO's modality when it comes to ensuring ownership and embedding of the capacity building?
Shena, thank you very much for the question. And actually, traditionally, capacity development, capacity building is equated with training, which is delivered as a standalone activity. However, an enhanced approach considers training as one of the modalities in a wider portfolio of instruments. What difference does it make? When integrated in a broader capacity development portfolio of interventions, training can enhance organizational performance, not only individual skills and knowledge. So let me bring some modalities of support at national level of capacity development processes. I'm talking about, for instance, facilitation of experience sharing, South-South cooperation agreements, policy support, facilitation of organizational development, creation of networks, training on the job learning, coaching, mentoring, development of technical and functional skills, convening of national regional events, support to knowledge sharing, and facilitation of leadership development. So just to frame this in an example, delivering training and on-the-job learning solution is one of the most common modalities that FAO employs to improve competencies and skills at the individual level. However, for training to trigger and help institutionalize change processes within organizations, it has to be used in conjunction with other capacity development modalities, which can further support the gradual uptake of change. These may include advocacy measures, support to policy review, knowledge sharing, or support to pilot experiences. Another example is how FAO's efforts in facilitating the participation of countries from different regions and into regional or international fora, workshops, and other exchange to strengthen their knowledge and build their confidence. And it has been really important, this type of approach to sustain capacity. Many beneficiaries underscore the lasting benefits of opportunities provided by FAO, but also by other UN agencies and cooperation to develop their confidence, enhance their communication and negotiation skills, and exchange ideas. So such exposure helps some individuals influence also their organizations, but also their environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Rocio. Before I hand over to you, Orlando, for your response, I just had a question about whether FAO has looked at peer-to-peer engagements. And sorry, go.
Absolutely, I think it depends very much on the regions, and peer-to-peer has normally been used in, I would say, across all the regions. And I think it's something also that it's been absolutely requested by countries. Peer-to-peer absolutely is one of the modalities. Yeah.
Yes, because Orlando, and why I was thinking of the peer-to-peer, because on our one program, it's called the Southern Africa Climate Finance Partnership, it was exactly that question, Orlando, about making the case for climate in the GCF proposals. And so we had some countries asking us, aren't there other countries who have done it successfully and that we can then have an exchange with to learn from them? So they didn't ask us to send consultants. They said, please, can we learn from countries that have done it successfully? So I thought that, those sorts of peer-to-peer exchanges are often quite impactful. Orlando, your response to the question about the modalities for ensuring ownership?
Thank you very much. Before responding to the question, I want to comment again on the issue of the rational climate rationality. The point on that is not about understanding the methodologies of the technical system to evaluating the climate rationality. It's required information. And in order to be able to respond to that, you need the modeling, you need the scenarios, you need the climate information. Then you can have the methodology, but you do nothing with the methodology if you don't have the information, the factual information you need, and the projection information you need to deal with that. On the issue of the ownership,
Is that your side, Orlando?
Sure.
Okay.
I think it's over now.
It's gone.
I move my hands. Well, it's okay. In the issue of ownership, for us, the climate change is a developmental issue. So it's about our development, and then ownership is not an alternative or a possibility. It's obvious. So we cannot see the nothing around climate change which is not based on our own goals, needs, strategies, plans. Therefore, that is the way in which we see the natural process and the capacity building process. So for us to ensure the ownership, one crucial point is to channel this process into the developmental process, to consider the climate dimension as part of the general dimension of development. And then we have, of course, the appropriation of the developmental process. And then, because of that, we also prefer to have that capacity building at the highest possible institutional level, because we fully recognize the importance of the local. But when you try exercises at the local level, which are not matched with the general national priorities, the general and national framework for development, then maybe you are not guiding the process in the right way. So those are our main points, to consider that at the national level, to prefer preparation at the institutional level, and then to produce from the institutional level a process of downscaling this effort of capacity building.
Thank you, Orlando. And building on that, Orlando, do you have any views on why ownership is important, particularly for developing countries? Like, what is your sense? Why is it important to have this ownership? Because we talk about ownership, but why is it important?
Well, I think that when you are from the developing world, you are still in a process, you are still fighting to create your model of development, but still trying to build your social and economic framework for development, and still there are some fragilities in this system. So it's important that you take together all the climate issues into that framework in order to avoid that you may be moving in a different way. Climate issues, which is in the end, are very consubstantially linked to the developmental issues. So you need to protect your development system and then to consider into it the climate.
Yes. Thank you, Orlando. And so I think in terms of the ownership, and there's some really useful and interesting insights. I just want to move us a bit, move now from some of the background, move into the challenges and barriers. So for both of you, and Rocio, I'm going to ask you to go first. So again, talking to your experience in delivering capacity development interventions, etc., what is the main challenges and opportunities to fostering ownership and demand-driven capacity building? And I mean, I won't. Yes, you go, Rocio. I was going to say yes. Go.
Thank you very much, Shena. From the FAO's perspective, programs and projects are by nature interventions aimed at achieving defined results with resources, with limited resources in a specific sector with local partners. Therefore, they are planned to create measurable outputs and make the allocation of resources transparent for the resource partners, implementing agencies, and other stakeholders. However, if we restrict our attention only to creating outputs without considering how to strengthen the capacity of the national system, and particularly of the individuals and organizations involved in our work, we may face extreme challenges in handing over the project or program. The project or program can only be sustainable when external agencies withdraw, if local partners have developed a sense of ownership and have strengthened their capacities in the areas required. FAO's successful experiences reveal that it is important to have a clear exit strategy for the very beginning of the intervention. This will enable FAO staff and partners to define exactly which capacities at the national or local levels have to be strengthened, so that partners can take over the process once a project is closed. In this respect, it is important to clarify from the very beginning the type of capacities needed to ensure the sustainability of the program, the organizations and individuals who will play a role in taking over the outputs of the program, and continue implementing activities after its completion, the handover mechanisms and the level of commitment from national or local actors to continue the activity. Back to you, Shena.
Rocio, and it's something I've been meaning to ask you earlier also. How do you embed your capacity development activities in the system? Is it something you look at? Do you assess the system before and then ascertain what sort of intervention will be sustainable in that system?
Thank you, Shena. Yes, sure. We have, FAO has a strategy of capacity development, and we are, of course, encouraged to embed all the good practice and the tools that are available to implement in the different contexts. So we have a series of tools, and I think what will help very these panels, I will be sharing some links that could be useful for all the people that is hearing right now to us, so they can see which are the different models that are available to everybody to start implementing any type of program or activity, not only that is called capacity development, but in any type of intervention. So capacity development actually is embedded not only for those projects or programs that are called capacity building or capacity development, but it's embedded in the whole system of projects and programs of FAO. And we do this systematically through different ways in the different, I would say, in the complete project cycle of any project and program, and we have a specific tool to address starting from the needs and gaps assessment, mapping, stakeholder mapping, etc. There is a series of tools that are available that help us normally when we arrive to a country, when we work at regional level, to bring together and to use it in order to ensure that it's embedded in any activity that we are implementing. Back to you, Shena.
Thank you, Lucio. And yes, over to you, Orlando, some of the challenges, opportunities, and what I'm quite interested to hear also, Orlando, is how you see capacity development activities have changed due to COVID. Because I think the impacts have been huge. Yeah. So, I mean, it was a challenge, but I'm sure there was an opportunity in there as well. So if I look at what we did, we've had to shift lots of stuff virtually, but it does mean we're now having these sorts of conversations, which we wouldn't have before. Because before all these used to be face-to-face, but now we're having these engagements, and it seems to have opened up the space for a lot more engagement. Yeah, so just your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I fully agree with you that we have now better spaces for talking around these issues. On the barriers and also on the opportunities, I think that still an important barrier or challenge is on the requirements of the donor providers of the capacity building. We had 2 years ago this case of a project about creating capacities on the climate change response, and the proposal of the donors was mainly about international consultant, and we want to create a national unit to prepare the national technician to provide the capacity. And we spent almost a year and a half discussing with the donor around the kind of need we have in order to decide from our side the kind of project we want to have. And finally, we succeed on that, and we created that unit. The project ended, and the unit is still working and creating further capacities. And in our gross estimation we made on that, we estimated that we prepared 10 times more people than we were able to prepare with the international consultant formula. But still, in this case, the project was approved to us as an exception, and that exceptionality was very remarked by the donors. It's okay, we are going to do that, but in a very exceptional basis. That is not what we want to do in other cases. So that is still an important barrier. We can have that clarity in the conceptual framework of the ownership and the kind of project we need, but still the same level of comprehension is not in every donor. And then you have another barrier, which is about the short-lived project. So you need the capacity building in a permanent, sustainable basis. And when you have that kind of project that you start to finish, then you have a break in the provision of the capacity building you require. I don't know exactly which formula we can apply on that, but talking with our colleague from the Montreal Protocol negotiation, they explained me that they have under the Montreal Protocol this capacity building or institutional arrangement for capacity building, which is a permanent process, which every 2 years have some kind of financing for the capacity building needs of the country in this particular issue. So that the issue of the short-lived project. And then it's the issue of the investment, the need of of resources to implement issues, because you can have a need, but not necessarily a capacity building need. Maybe you have some clarity on what you have to do, but still you lack the financial resources, still you lack the technology you need, and then sometimes you create the capacity, but you don't have after that, you don't have all the means you need to implement the result of that capacity building creation you produce. So there are three barriers, and once again, I don't think that there is a perfect formula to deal with that. But in the end, it's also a matter of ownership. Is the country understand that and see where are the barriers, the challenge, and the opportunity? Then you can guide the process and to try to produce the better of every opportunity you have for cooperation.
Yeah. Thank you, Orlando. So you've touched on my next question as well, which was because you're very and I'm grateful you did that. You gave the barriers and possible solutions. So I'm going to go to the CEO, because if you just want to give us, based completely on your experiences, the projects you've delivered, what are some of the solutions to the issues of ownership and making it sustainable? So I think you touched on it a bit when we chatted about FAO's approach, but if you want to talk a bit more to that.
Thank you very much, Jenna, for the question. Actually, there is no easy one-size-fits-all solution for capacity development. So interventions need to be tailored to the context of the particular country. And I think I recall exactly what Armando was saying. A single organization often cannot achieve complex development goals on its own while also being efficient and cost-effective. So it necessarily needs to engage in a process with multiple stakeholders to take effective actions and make efficient use of resources. Therefore, multi-stakeholder processes are an important part of any intervention, and any of capacity building intervention. The active participation of all the stakeholders is crucial to ensure ownership of the process and its outcome, relevance of the outcome, and commitment to its implementation. People, women, men, youth, need to understand their situation, initiate action with their own creativity. Through mobilization, people can organize themselves to act collectively by defining their needs and preferences, choosing their own agenda, and developing their vision and strategy, rather than having these things imposed upon them from the outside. In this context, strengthening women's participation, ensuring a broad representation of different groups and identities, is crucial to providing them with the opportunity to articulate and express their specific needs and interests. In brief, a good practice is to show that an excellent way to increase the quality of any intervention is to engage the people who can affect or be affected by projects and programs in a dialogue throughout the project or program cycle. And let me share an example. Recently, with the CBIT Forest project I'm coordinating, we have worked with 6 pilot countries: Guatemala, Honduras, Uganda, Cote d'Ivoire, Thailand, and Laos. We have performed a needs and gaps assessment of their national forest monitoring systems. FAO has developed an Excel-based tool which has contributed to this process. But probably the most rich and interesting aspect was the virtual sessions held with different stakeholders coming from diverse institutions, working together to assess their own needs and gaps, and FAO facilitating this process. In summary, active participation of all stakeholders in forest monitoring implementation processes is crucial to ensuring ownership and relevance of the results. Back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that powerful message, Garcia. Orlando, I'm going to look to you to give the final, this is the final question, and it's just for you, Orlando, because we're running out of time. But what are the key leverage points and actions to enhance country ownership and to better attune capacity building to developing countries' needs and priorities?
Well, I think that one key element is to have a national evaluation, national diagnosis of the capacity building needs. Sometimes the information is there, but it's fragmented. So by having that kind of national diagnosis, you can then try to match any possibility of capacity building needs with what you already previously diagnosed as the priority of the country. Then you have to consider also the relevance of the capacity building that is on the over the table, because it's important to choose this kind of capacity building that better match the relevant needs of the country, which in climate change means mainly two issues. On the evaluation of the climate conditions of the country, or the climate scenarios, and on the specific measures for adaptation and mitigation that you can introduce in your national framework and apply in your national conditions. So the relevance is also an important issue. Also, in the selection of the tools to implement the capacity building, you have your own practice, you have your national practice, your culture even, and it's important to try to match this kind of tools instrument to your national practice and national culture and natural characteristic, because sometimes you have very sophisticated tools but are not really connected with your reality. And finally, I think that an important way of promoting a very valid capacity building way is around the South-South cooperation and the South-South-North cooperation. We have a long practice on that in Cuba, and in particular in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean. And for instance, we have this capacity building center. It's a risk reduction and capacity building for adaptation center, which was created a few years ago with the cooperation of Norwegian cooperation. And we have trained more than 200 people in this center, coming from more than 20 countries on issues linked with disaster risk reduction and adaptation. So I think that is also a very useful way of moving forward capacity building, taking countries which are at the same level of development, that have similar problems, and that can have a more fluent conversation on some issues.
Thank you, Orlando. And thank you, Rocio, because I mean, there's just so much in this discussion. It's been such a rich discussion. And I'm sure in the plenary now, there's going to be quite a bit of interaction around this. So thank you for your time. And also, I think we just stuck to time. So Simone, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Shanaz, and thank you, Orlando and Rocio, for this really, really rich and interesting discussion. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who would have liked for it to continue a little bit longer and to continue listen to you. But thanks very much also for sticking to the time, because I'm sure, as Shanaz mentioned, we're going to have a really, really interesting open plenary segment to follow, where participants can ask their questions and add further views and perspectives. So we will now have a 5-minute break. And I would invite everyone to join us after these 5 minutes for the open discussion. Thanks a lot to everyone.
Hello, welcome back, everyone. After this short break, we would now like to start our plenary discussion. We will start with questions addressed directly to our great panelists, Rocio, Orlando, and to our moderator, Shenaz. Please either indicate in the chat that you would like to make an intervention from the floor or simply post your question directly in the chat. And then I will be reading out the questions to the panelists, and then after a round of questions, I'll ask them to reply to your questions. So the floor is open for any questions you may have. Again, you can use the chat function or to post your question or indicate if you want to take the floor. Use the microphone. I see my colleague and friend Farai. Please, Farai.
Morning, Alejandro, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having this discussion and forum. I actually had a bunch of questions, but I'm going to try and limit them to just three. And they're directed at Rocio from FAO. The first one, I'm wondering how is FAO measuring capacity that has been built or enhanced? I'm just curious what sort of indicators they're using and how they're measuring whether capacity has indeed been built or developed. The second question, which is addressed to both Rocio and Orlando, is how do you deal with the movement of people within and outside institutions? So I understand capacity building or development involves people and people gaining skills and the other things that we all know. And how do you deal with the movement of people within and outside institutions, which affects whether capacity is retained within a certain institution, department, or unit? And then the last question is capacity, since it's also about people, how do you deal with the workload that people have? And in this respect, I mean specifically the people who are targeted at receiving that capacity development or capacity building. Because a lot of the times, whilst they may be involved in one project or the next, but they're also participating or involved in other duties and responsibilities within their own spheres and organizations and institutions. So when it comes to enhancing their knowledge, abilities, or skills, or whatever, in a certain on a certain project or whatever dimension you're focusing on, how do you deal with that increased workload where the capacity building is not a matter of them necessarily understanding the process and getting technical skills, but just in the time they have to allocate for those specific deliverables? Thanks, Alejandro. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Farai. Very relevant questions. And maybe before going to our panelists, I see a request from Professor Misan Khan. So let's take another question and then maybe we can move to our panelists. Misan?
Yes, thank you, Alejandro. Yeah. I was listening to the interesting interventions and also the comments from Shehnaz as the moderator. I have a comment and also a question. There was discussion about capacity building and capacity development. Since UNFCCC uses the terminology capacity building, so we use this terminology. But there is a basic difference between capacity development and capacity building. Capacity development does indicate that there is some base, as the literature tells, but capacity building may start from scratch. So with this comment, I have a question to Condor. Her name is Rizzo. Okay. She mentioned in response to Shehnaz's question that how do you embed capacity building in your activities? And she responded that in the project activities from very, very beginning. But we know capacity building is not a one discrete process. It takes a longer time. But projects are most often very short term, maximum 2 or 3 years duration. And capacity building as a process cannot have a real outcome just in 2 or 3 years. It takes at least 5 to 7 years. So how to build sustainable capacity building is a challenge under the present dispensation of project mode of donor interventions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Misan. Very relevant points. Thanks for your comment and also directing to one of the questions from our panelists. So I think we have enough materials for our panelists to provide their inputs and answers. So I think there are questions directly related to you, Rocio, but also to Orlando. But I also like to hear from Shehnaz because of her vast experience. But I'll hand it over maybe first to Rocio, please.
Thank you very much, Alexandro, and thank you to the two questions. I have wrote some notes so I can remember them. So the first one was how to measure capacity development. And I think this is a very relevant question. And actually, if we want to ensure that we are delivering properly, and we need to improve in that type of delivery, we need to implement what we call the satisfaction evaluations. This is for the end, of course, but what we normally do with capacity development processes is also to do evaluations at the very beginning of the process, with some knowledge, with that knowledge material from the beginning. And we do the same with the same methodology. We do the same at the end of the project. And this could be done in a workshop, in a 2-session workshop, in 1-session workshop. It could be done at the beginning of the project, at the beginning of the program. And this is just to help us to track if we have moved further in any step we have taken or any intervention. This is one method. There are different methods. As I was mentioning, what we are using, for instance, currently with this virtual mode is using quite a lot the evaluation of the different interventions we are using the satisfaction evaluation, if we do a massive open online course, if we do a webinar, etc. So that is the way also for us to learn if we have done it properly or not, and how we can improve. And many of the things actually we are doing, and just to give you an example, we have organized last year at the end of the year a massive open online course on forest and transparency under the Paris Agreement. And through the satisfaction survey, actually we were able to identify some things that were really important, like the timing, the duration, and the content, and to fine-tune our second edition of the massive open online course. So for us, having these evaluations in the different point of time are really crucial. Regarding the question that deals with the movement of people, and I think this is really very important question, and I ask myself when I join FAO, because it happens very frequently that we involve with an individual from a certain institution, and probably in 1 or 2 year time that person is moving from to another institution. And I got that response also, I would say 5-6 years after that, because that person actually, it happens to a country, and that person was trained, and this person really grows its skills, its technical skills. And what happened is that this person, yes, it's true, is not part of that ministry where she used to work, but she's part of the whole system, of the national system. And this person is still contributing to its own country because she is providing expert advice, and she's contributing, and she keeps on growing. So it's true that in countries there is a vast turnover of individuals. But as far as you're able to contribute at individual level, that person then will be also able to be part of the system, and that is, I would say, one thing that I personally learned when we were like, oh, we are training so many people, and people is always changing, and so on. So I got the response. And I personally verify this experience, what I'm sharing right now with you. Regarding how you measure the workload, and this is actually something that we have been facing the last year due to the virtual meetings. I think the best way is to have a very good coordination with all the development partners. I mean, when you go to a country, you need to know who is there. So, of course, in an X country, there might be, and it happens very often, that is not only FAO, but there are other international organizations. So I think in order to avoid to overload the governmental people that you are working with, you really need to have a very good coordination with the other institutions to learn a bit, to share what you are doing, but also to learn what they will be doing, and just to avoid that actually the person that is working from the Ministry of Environment, of Forestry, of Agriculture is not overloaded, because this is absolutely something that has to be avoided. Regarding the question from Professor Misan, yes, it's absolutely it's true. I mean, capacity building is starting really from scratch, while capacity development is when already there is some capacity in the countries. So I would say that the only way, even if you have 1-2 shorter projects, the only way that you at least contribute to maintain the whole system is that you identify those functional capacities I was talking about, and help those individuals to grow, to go through this process, because those functional capacities will be helpful for maintaining and making sustainable the process. So that is that is the reason I talk about these two technical and functional capacity. So I think both of them have to be absolutely encouraged from the very beginning in order to make sure that even if you have a short project, you're able to keep the people that will be there, will be able to sustain and maintain the process in their own countries. Thank you, and back to you, Alessandro.
Thank you very much, Rocio. So I'll hand it over to Orlando and then Shenaz, just to give your comments. Please, Orlando.
Just a moment, please. I'm opening the camera. Well, thank you for the questions. Are very interesting. I am still thinking around it. Well, as I said before, for us, climate change is a developmental issue, and capacity building for us is capacity building for development. That's clear. But still, I need to learn more about this idea of the capacity development as equal to or a category superior to capacity building. Because in the end, capacity development or capacity for development is something very broad that have to do with many issues that are beyond the capacity building activities. Let's say now we have a big challenge to our capacity for development because of the COVID-19, and that's something you cannot solve through capacity building activities. So we will still continue using capacity building activities for the moment until we get more clarity on the general conceptualization. On the way of measuring the effectivity, I understand that from the view of the provider, it's important to have that kind of satisfaction analysis and the consideration of those who receive the capacity building about the level of satisfaction with the capacity building provided. But from the national point of view, we still need a deeper evaluation of the impact of the capacity building. And in order to do that, you need national indicators for resilient development, indicators for low carbon development, and then you need to match the results of the capacity building with those national indicators and national goals. So in the end, you have to respond from the national point of view to the question. Because of the capacity building, we are in a better condition now to face the impact of climate change. We are on the way of getting more resilient, of getting a more low carbon and more clean development. So that's the kind of question that in the end have the capacity building activity to respond, to be sure that they are really contributing to the national work. I know it's difficult. In fact, in Cuba, one of the issues we are dealing now is the creation of such indicator. And of course, this conversation will help. In that sense, we will consider that kind of capacity building issues when elaborating on the indicators. But still, I insist that we need some kind of national evaluation on the effect of the capacity building, on the results, on the real implication of the capacity building for the national climate change program. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Orlando. Shenaz, would you like to contribute, please?
Yes, I will. And Farai, nice to see you. I think the last time we saw each other was possibly in Bonn. Yes. So in terms of measuring capacity building, for us in our work, what we often do, we link it to an outcome. So we'll say capacity building to ensure this climate action, and then further down the line, we'll go in to ascertain whether the climate action has actually happened. So, so we won't have, so our indicators are not capacity of a person built, but rather the capacity built to do something. And then what we look for is whether that activity has happened, because then it means the capacity was built. And then Professor Mizanka, nice to see you also. For us, and I know this is probably going to throw a whole cat amongst the pigeons, we actually like to not talk about capacity development or building, we like to talk about capability. And the way we see capability is a combination of individual capacity and the system capacity. And so together you have the capability of a system to respond to certain things. So it's not just about the individuals. And it's a longer term process, which is often difficult to achieve because of the donor funding cycles. But what we see it as is more a learning journey where the individuals get capacitated, but then the system can also respond to that capacity. We need to ensure that the infrastructure is there for the individuals to do what they want to do with a new enhanced capacity. So it's a longer term process, so it's not a workshop. I mean, our one program, I think we ran it over 3 years, the same group of people, and we called it a learning journey. And at the end, the system had the capability to respond to requests from the GCF. So we broaden out our definition.
Thank you very much, Shanaz. I see that there's still a couple of requests from the floor, so I'll take them, and I note your request, Misan, to come back, but if you allow me to give a chance to those who have raised their hand. Also, just to note that there is a comment in the chat about from a colleague in Indonesia, if I'm correct, about youth, the engagement of youth in capacity building. And here is something that maybe also you want to speak to. On the issue of capacity building and youth, just to mention that there will be an event organized in the regional climate weeks, the one in Latin America commencing tomorrow, that will focus on that aspect precisely. It's been organized by the PCCB, the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, and its network, and will focus on how to better engage youth in capacity building, not only as recipients, but also potentially providers of capacity building. So, and the intention is that this type of events will take place in the regional climate weeks. That's sorry for the commercial, but it would be a good idea to mention it. I have Pemi from South Africa, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are listening from. Thank you very much to the speakers. It was really interesting to listen to the dynamics and also the new concepts, especially the use of capacity building and capacity development. Now, from my side, most of the questions were sort of dealt with that I wanted to ask, but I wanted to find out, how do we deal with institutionalizing capacity building or development, especially in countries that lack the infrastructure, or the infrastructure is still in the process of being built? Because as we've continuously heard, is that capacity building, it's a sustainable process, a long-term process, and for one to be able to see the impacts of that capacity that has been provided, it's a long-term process. Now, how do we deal with institutionalizing where the infrastructure is lacking or is still under construction? Thank you, I submit.
Thank you very much, Pemi. I thought I had a hand from Marcella, but I don't know if you still want to ask your question. If not, just let us know or write it out in the chat. So I'm very conscious of time, so maybe with, yes?
Yes. My question regarding capacity building and talking about the whole perspective, particularly when we are looking at, I'm from India, and I'm talking about the large areas, rural areas that need to be. This capacity building needs a lot of time and investment, and I like the concept of capacity development, because it means it's working towards a mindset change. But however, in the complexity of bringing the needs of land, of water resource management, of agriculture management, of the whole complexity together, it is extremely time consuming. And I don't know how funding allows for so much of investment in this sort of in this sort of a requirement. But this I do see is absolutely essential.
Thank you very much, Marcela. There's also the important issue of gender considerations, which is brought up in the chat. Very conscious of time. Maybe with those two comments from our participants, I'll hand it back to our panelists. So maybe start this time with Orlando. Maybe your reflections or your responses to the latest set of questions.
I thank you. I think it's more a reflection than a response. I fully agree that strengthening the institutional capacity is crucial, is the basis for a successful process on facing climate change, including capacity building. In the case of Cuba, we have some level of human resources, research institution, some capacity building already established in the country that create some possibilities for us to better implementation of capacity building alternative, but still, of course, we face the similar challenge that other countries in the case of we lack all the institutional capacities. We lost sometimes the capacity we already create. We lost local technicians that are part of the capacity building of the country. So I at this point, I only kind of agree fully with the need that create that institutional framework as a departure point for all the capacity building process.
Thank you very much, Orlando. So maybe Shanaz on reflections, or maybe also on the topic of youth and gender. I know you've been working a lot on that.
Yeah.
Please.
So yeah, so thank you, Alejandro. So in terms of youth and gender, we actively have to invite them to the capacity building activities and to engage with them, because if left, we wouldn't get their inputs. So particularly for us, our focus is on gender. We actively go and seek out the women that we can do the capacity building with. Often we're needing to, when there's a demand from government or a policy or decision maker, we actually need to say we would like you to send female representatives. So it's not something that happens organically. It's something you have to actively do. And I think that's how it's going to be for the medium term until it becomes normalized.
Thank you very much, Shanaz. Rocio, maybe there is a question that maybe is also something that might be relevant for the work of FAO. What are some of the tips or insights for engaging with rural and poor communities who do not have the same access to those in urban areas? So Rocio, if you want to address this and maybe other reflections from what participants have said, please, Rocio.
Yes, Alessandro, thank you. I would like to just go back to that question of institutionalization, which I think it's quite relevant, and it's what we have been doing with the CBIT Forest Project. I mean, what happens in forest monitoring, but this is just to give an example, is that probably in many cases, countries have identified what do they need to measure in their forests, no? In simple words. However, what we have find out is also that there is, of course, a need to institutionalize the way in which these things are done. So in the forest sector, particularly in forest monitoring, FAO has developed these voluntary guidelines on national forest monitoring, and there are a series of principles that help countries, guide countries, provide advice on how an institutionalization process can take place, particularly in this context. So there are some governance principles, which means that there is a need for country ownership and responsibility. You need legal and policy bases. you need to institutionalize your national forest monitoring system. You need research infrastructure and capacity building, capacity development as some of the principles of governance. You need participatory discussion process. You need to have also identify national information needs. You need to integrate and make consistent information sources, be flexible, have a multi-purpose approach, among many other things. So what I want to share in this context is the importance of institutionalization in any path that a country needs to take place. No, so I'm just giving the example of what forest. So as for the agriculture sector, agricultural surveys are key data sources and providers. National forest monitoring system are key sources of data where people, policymakers, or any type of stakeholder in a country can access to information and be informed. It's true, these processes are time consuming. I agree, it's true, but it's really worth. And I tell you from direct experience, in the last year, I would have expected to travel to all these pilot countries. It has not been possible. So it has been, I would say, from the one side, a pity that we were not face-to-face dealing with countries. However, virtual sessions with them in addressing their needs and gaps through this National Forest Monitoring System needs and gaps assessment tool we have developed. These sessions have allowed us also to reflect much more, to have time to reflect, to have different sessions. So instead of taking probably 2 or 3 days of a workshop, it took 3-4 months to reflect. But at the end, I want to say that it come really nice, because I think we were able to involve all the stakeholders that needs to be informed. Through that process, we went through a capacity building process, because many of them were not aware about the voluntary guidelines. And we learned together how to deal with this process, because all this virtual was also new for them, and also new for us to handle this amount of work with so many countries. So it's true, time consuming, but I think it was absolutely worth to take much more time, but to arrive to a proper action plan that was absolutely led by the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rocio, and I think you also answered the importance of engaging the stakeholders, rural communities, poor communities as much as possible, and adjusting, for example, in this virtuality modality. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Rocio, Shenaz, and Orlando, for the great discussion. Thank you to our participants for the great questions and insights. Unfortunately, this brings us to the final part of our capacity building talk. In this part, we would like to know, before closing, what are your key takeaways from the discussion? And here we will also use Menti very quickly. So Max, you're the expert on Menti. Please guide us through.
Thank you, Alejandro, and thank you for the discussion. So I shared in the chat again the same instructions to join the Menti. So we just quickly have 2 questions to get your main takeaways. But to start, I want to ask you all just how you're feeling after today's session. So you can just type in 1 or 2 words to get how you're doing after this session. So please go to menti.com and enter the code that's been written above here and in the chat. And fabulous! Wow. Well, that's good to see. We have the first word. Let's see. Others motivated. All right, there we go. People are feeling inspired, good, positive, focused. That's impressive after 90 minutes. Feeling like consensus. That's interesting. Positive, a broadening point of view. That's good to hear. Better informed, encouraged, exciting. challenging. It can also happen. Challenged, that's also good to hear. It's of course not an easy task to move this ahead, but also we have encouraged and positive, informed and inspired. So I'm very happy to see this. Let's see, we got a few more. Learning, training, better informed. Well, thanks all very much. I think we have a nice group of words here. Then I go on to the last question to close today as well. And that is, there I'm going to ask you what your key takeaways are of today. So let us go to the final one here. You can just type 1 or 2 sentences of what your main key takeaways are of today's sessions. Things that struck you, things you find very interesting, things you find surprising, or things you think are very valuable to you've learned and you take along in your work. We need to work together to improve. I think that's a very interesting lesson. Capacity building has to be country-led, also an important one. A systematic and country-driven approach. The discussion of capacity building versus capacity development is something someone highlights. That's something more people highlight, I see. The importance of sharing is being highlighted by someone. The need to institutionalize capacity building programs in countries and regions. Cross-generation is also being highlighted by someone in capacity building. The importance of thinking about the next stage. I saw after capacity building support leaves the country. The importance of a participatory approach and sustainable capacity building, institutional and legal frameworks. That capacity building takes time is also something someone highlights. Someone else highlights also that it takes a long time. The idea of creating a national unit that will stay. So I think we have here a nice array of ideas and takeaways that emerge from today's session. We will also share these with you afterwards. And I'm very happy you all managed to take away something from today's session. And with that, I'm giving it back to Alejandro to close today's session. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Max. We hope this discussion today provided useful impulses to related discussions in the UNFCCC process, including the negotiations themselves. We also hope the findings from the discussion can feed into the work of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. The PCCB, under its current work plan, is collating, reviewing and sharing experiences, good practices and lessons learned related to enhancing the ownership of developing countries in building and maintaining, and I would add here, developing capacities, because we had this discussion. To this end, the PCCB intends to launch a call for submission to parties and non-party stakeholders in June, July this year, so stay tuned for that. Of course, we will prepare a summary report of today's event and will be shared with all participants soon. So we all have a record of the very rich discussions that took place here. We will also post a link to the recording of today's event on the Capacity Building Talks website. We encourage you all to share your views on today's event and/or the link to the recording via your social media accounts with the hashtag @UNFCCC. And maybe we can put the hashtag in the chat. With this, the only thing left for me is to thank you all very much on behalf of the Capacity Building team and the Secretariat, thanking our distinguished and fabulous moderator and excellent panelists. Maybe I can ask the 3 of them to put their camera on so we can have a view of all the panelists and moderators. And and they will also to let you know that there will be a survey for obtaining your feedback on this event. We hope to see many of you at the 3rd Capacity Building Talk later this year, and you will be receiving information on the next event in due course. Thank you very much and wish you a very good day, and please stay well and healthy. Thank you very much.